the pastor of this church to render a prayer. He's a friend of mine, and I know he prays good.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Let us pray then. Great God, whom we know in many ways, who we call by many names, God who is greater than we and calls us to be more than we would be on our own, we gather here seeking to come and be involved with a world more just, a world that listens to the people that you would have us listen to, that sees a world and helps us to build a world fit for all your children to dwell in. So be and abide with us this evening. Help us to listen carefully, to think clearly, to have our passions aroused that won't rest here, but will go forth from this place, that we might be continually compelled agents of the world you intend. All this we ask by the many ways and names we know you. One God. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor. Well, we are here today for a great event. A lot of us met our featured speaker over a year ago. But he comes to us today. David Cobb is a lawyer, and he has been engaged in the political arena for quite some time. I do know that he did run for office at some point in time, and has been engaged in the body of politics for quite some time. And then and has also been engaged in the nonviolent civil disobedient acts in the country to bring attention to some issues that people need to pay attention to. And then came the Supreme Court that told you all, didn't tell me, but no, it told all of us, that corporations were individuals, that which said that the corporate vote, because of all the money that it has, is stronger than the voice of the people. Supreme Court solidified that, which we in the community felt that was wrong. And we still feel that it's wrong. We know that the corporation does not spew a family, does not have a family, does not raise a family. It's the individuals, that are an important part of this action. The individual human beings, the individual families that we have. So we invited David to Grand Rapids, and he spoke at Fountain Street Church initially. Great crowd, great group of people. But out of that speech came a Grand Rapids contingent of people that is part of the Move to Amend. So I want the people that are part of the Grand Rapids contingent of Move to Amend, would you stand, please?
All right.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, as we move on, there's a brother, John Milhut, that's retired, that I want to acknowledge too, for helping to print the flyers that we have today. And I don't know if he's here, but could you give him a name? So I'm going to introduce a couple of people, and David brought a friend of his with him as well. But I think I'll wait a little bit because I think this young man is going to give us a special treat. I don't know if he's going to go first or second. Go first. but I think he's going to give us a special treat. And he's an executive director of the Hip Hop Congress. Now, the Hip Hop Congress, this is a relatively new movement, a nowadays movement of young folks. What's happening in the Hip Hop Congress is that we have cross-cultural and cross-racial groups that have come together to work together. You know, I'm 66 years old, and historically, you know, it wasn't like that. You know, we'd always work in little vacuums. Sometimes we'd have the same idea, but we didn't cross over that much. But the hip hop generation and the people in the hip hop generation are somewhat different from us, in that their music tells them that it's about more than us. So I'm going to bring this young man up, and then after he finishes, then we'll go to the meat of the program and have David Cobb come on. Is that all right?
Yeah.
All right, then let's bring, without further ado, our hip-hop artist, Mr. Shimiko Noble. Give him a great round.
Evening, folks. My name's actually Shimako, just for reference. And interestingly enough, I'm 33, which makes me literally half your age. Which is kind of crazy. I'm going to use this mic from now as I talk. I'm not going to use it when I do the piece because I use my hands a lot. As mentioned, my name is Shimako. I'm a hip-hop artist and also the executive director of an organization called Hip Hop Congress. We actually started in 1997, and we began in California. And at that point in time, our goal was to create collective power among artist communities. Since, you know, in America, artists are often taught that they have to fight for themselves and no one else. And, you know, we might know this speech from other areas of our life. One of the things that created us was the 1996 Telecommunications Act. How many people in here are familiar with that, the Telecommunications Act? A couple people? Okay. Well, Democratic President Bill Clinton helped sign the bill into law, and one of the things that the bill did was it deregulated the ownership of media. So prior to this moment, corporations couldn't own more than a limited amount of radio stations, television stations, and newspapers. So if you ever are listening to the radio, or watching television, or reading the newspaper, wondering why you keep hearing the same stuff over and over and over again, it's because in 1996, advertising companies took over your news. Right? That's just the reality of the situation. To kind of put a number on this, Clear Channel, for instance, which is an advertising company that owns radio and TV, it only had 70 radio stations in 1996. By late 1997, it had over 140, doubling in size in 1 year. And so part of our struggle has been to authentically and completely communicate what our culture, what the culture of hip-hop, what the message of hip-hop genuinely represents. And let me just tell you, it's probably not what most of you see on television or hear in the news. And I'm here as a physical representative of that. I also want to acknowledge my brother Khalid, who was here in the audience with us, who is the founder of the Black Mobile Museum 101, which is a very important piece of art, work, and history that you should ask him more about later. That being said, I'm here with David Cobb, my friend, brother from Move to Amend, and we started working together around this corporations issue because it's been killing our culture for years. It's something that we relate to each other on. And so I want to do a piece for you guys tonight. This piece is called Broke. And I wrote this piece right after the market crash of 2008. And it was my attempt to write an artistic piece that was a reflection of what all of America, right? Student, teacher, adult, child, black, white, male, woman, what we were all experiencing and still struggling to talk about, right? Being broke. It's a source of shame in this country, right? Even though 80% of us are experiencing it. With that being said, did I put this somewhere? You want to hold that? All right, can you folks in the back hear me right now? All right, is there anybody that cannot hear me right now? Just making sure. Cats is broke. You act like that's a joke, like these cats will not grab a gap and smoke for like half a Coke and a jacket low, getting the sense you ain't out here. But the young G's are really about it and down to clown here. Down to move pounds all across the town here. And make moves without fear. We got these poorly rated makeshift lawmakers mucking up, bankers sinking takers, but the haters still coming up. People losing their homes with no one to blame except an imaginary market that gets harder to tame. God, it's a shame these credit companies harvest your pain. Pillage and plunder and just chalk it up as part of the game. Stalking your wage, call you and call you and call you again. Make deals, don't even know who you bargaining with. They try to act like it's not a threat to their order. But thousands in Detroit still don't have any water. Going after your son or your daughter to sign them up for their own slaughter, another public housing unit torn up. Police don't even bother with conversations or whatnot. They just speak with a taser or object with a gunshot. They abhor us all in their court of law. It is crystal clear. Convicted for surviving the traps they have engineered. Folks are starving. The White House is starting to look like J.P. Morgan. Obama is barged in by a limited margin because of his charm and all of the harm the Bush farm did. But I'm going to keep it real. Because even though we won, we still got an economic system that's been overrun. And we don't understand it. Man, we are all lost. These corporations, they only want to cut the costs. They have to wait jobs, prices don't level off, playing ball's more expensive, people have less to toss. We've always loved America because we've been better off, but give a warm goodbye to privilege, y'all, because we just shipped it off. Yeah. They bail out all the banks and raise the stakes for corporate cronies while we have to choose between bankruptcy or our heart exploding. It thickens up in this piece. We see the plot unfolding, cooped up in a pseudo-free market just as it starts imploding. Cats are pissed. Critical mass, what'll happen to us after this? It's a conspiracy, a theory we can master if we get past our past. Look at the math and just smash it. For many, there's a God, for some, cash is it. And they'll be glad when fascism crushes activists. Why are toddlers sleeping on benches while pundits addicted to pills or sitting on TV just promoting agendas? We could affect it all with our collective thought. But there are sections lost and there are sections bought. Right. And there are sections that may never want to understand, and there are sections that will gain the upper hand working the numbers, man. There are lines drawn. You're wrong, try to ride the fence. Signify your mind and then focus. Use your mind's offense. It won't take one of us. It won't take 25. It will take all of us for all of us to survive. Thank you.
That was great. The only thing I would recommend is that you write your words and give the words to the people. Because I think I understood the words because, I'm from that special place, called the streets. Right. I mean, I've grown up and have honed myself somewhat, but I'm from that special place. I didn't grow up as goody two-shoes. I didn't grow up as a person with a silver spoon in my mouth. So the language, you have some powerful language in that speech. Very powerful language. And people need to know exactly what you're saying because that language and what you said to the group here is on fire. I mean, in my mind. So, hey man, that's a hit.
Right?
That's right. So now, coming and to affect the national political scene, to effectuate policy, is a strong and tough undertaking. To go around the country and talk to people, some that will listen, and some that don't know that they should listen. Takes a very courageous individual. I once upon a time, and I'm not going to be long, but once upon a time I was a salesman. So I know how it is to go and talk to somebody and then prospect and talk to somebody else, and prospect and talk to somebody else, and then finally get somebody to say, yeah, that's a great idea. So without further ado, I want to bring David Cobb up, because that's exactly who I'm talking about.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Paul. All right, y'all. Now, what I'm going to do is take 1 second to bring this down, and here's why. Because I'm very excited to talk to this group of people that are gathered here, but thanks to the work of Corrine, 1,000 more are going to know about this, because Corrine decided to stop hating the corporate media and to become the people's media. Thank you, Corrine, for that. Right? I also want to honor my friend and colleague and comrade Shamako Noble, who gave us that performance piece, and to actually acknowledge and own something that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I actually thought that hip-hop music was misogynistic, it was violence, there was a whole thing that I had thought about hip-hop. And I want to acknowledge something, that it was a young woman in her 30s, at the time in her mid-20s, a white woman, actually, who said, you know, David, for somebody who knows so much about the corporation's role in law and in culture and so many other ways, your ignorance of hip-hop is astounding to me. And she said, please sit down and listen. And she slipped in a compact disc of a band called The Coup. And then she introduced me to a band called Dead Prez. And then she reintroduced me to Public Enemy, and I listened with new ears. And then I began to realize, well, I'll be doggone if I don't actually like what's going on. And then I got Shamako into my life to begin to contextualize, oh, actually what happened in hip-hop was an expression at the cultural level by people who had been exploited and oppressed, who were not merely angry. You're damn right they were angry, but they were also expressing the idea of a new way of being, and it was authentic, it was coming from integrity, it was sorrow, it was pain, but it was also hope and promise. And what happened, as Shamako talked about, was through a political decision, policy decisions, that was actually not just controlled, but ultimately stripped away from its radical analysis, turned into something else, added a fresh dose of poison, but still made it taste good and sound good, and the beat was still bopping and rapping, and then sent it back out to folks like me, and then others, though, to experience that this is what culture is really like. And the point I'm making, my friends, it's just that deep. It is just that deep. And I'm going to use that introduction, and again, to thank my friend and colleague for that incredible piece. Shamako Noble. I'm going to invite Corrine, if she's up to it, and if Shamako is up to it as well, at some point after our presentation, after the Q&A, that perhaps Shamako might do that piece again with Corrine, framing you out properly, because I have yet to see, I've heard that piece multiple times, I've yet to see it on video in a way that I thought was sharp and crisp and tight, and I would be honored if Move to Amends Grand Rapids was the place that put it out there to actually be seen that way, right? And the reason that I really tied this in is not just because he's my friend, but also because, see, he told a story, right? Yes. And I think it's really important to recognize that what and how I would describe myself, straight up, I am a nonviolent revolutionary. I'm a nonviolent revolutionary. Oh, right, good. She's her head nodding. That's good. See, now I'm nonviolent to be sure. This moment in history is such that we cannot tinker at the margins, right? We have a global ecological crisis that is happening right now, and the window to affect that is small. But we've got a social justice crisis too, right? So we really have to actually do like big things in a hurry that are outside of the box of what most of us have thought about, most of us have been taught to think about. It's going to really require a big shift in thinking. And since I want to make that big shift in thinking, I want to share with you something that I knew intuitively as a trial lawyer, and now scientists are proving beyond a shadow of a doubt. And that's this. If you want to really persuade somebody, if you want to convince somebody to do big things, facts don't matter so much. Man, the first time I heard it just said that bluntly, I thought, this is terrible. Right? Like many of you, I've invested a lot of time and energy in learning facts. And there's this idea that if we can just present the facts logically and cogently, that everybody will see what we see and that somehow big change will happen. But then I came across the work of a fellow named George Lakoff. Oh, some of you know this name. George Lakoff, a cognitive scientist studying the human brain, more importantly, how we process information, how we know what we know. And what George Lakoff has proven is that if you want to be persuasive, it's not just that facts don't matter, it's that we understand the world through stories. We understand the world through the stories that we tell each other over and over again. And the best stories are ones that come out of art and culture as well as lived experience. And because I want to be persuasive and because I know that people, you, me, all human beings understand the world through stories, and because I want to be persuasive, folks, I'm going to tell a story. I'm going to tell a story on how it came to be that these large transnational corporations are not just exercising power. I'm going to tell a story on how it came to be that these large transnational corporations are ruling over us. As surely as masters once ruled slaves, as surely as kings once ruled subjects, unelected and unaccountable corporate CEOs are ruling us because they are making the decisions. Corporate CEOs already decided how much poison will be in the air that we're all breathing right now. Corporate CEOs already decided how much toxic poison will be in the water that we're all drinking. Corporate CEOs are deciding whether you get health care or not. Corporate CEOs decide whether to take this country into war. And we the people, we get to choose between Coke or Pepsi. We can choose between paper or plastic at the grocery store checkout line. See, you can have 17 different types of toothpaste to choose from. You don't believe me? Next time you go down a reasonably well-stocked department store, go down that toothpaste aisle and count. Think of me when you do it. See why you don't get 17 or more. See, we are inundated with consumer choices in this culture. Oh, provided you have the money to pay. That's kind of important too, right? Because what you need is not relevant in this society. It's whether you can pay for it, whether it's good for you or not, whether you need it or not. But if you can pay it, line up, we'll get it for you. The point I'm making, friends, is not that consumer choices are a bad thing. I'm glad to have some consumer choices. But do not mistake a consumer choice with political power. Amen. Political power would be the opportunity to participate in a meaningful way to affect the society that we live in. And that is not happening. And that leads me into this. I'm going to tell a story to be sure, and as I tell this story, I'm going to challenge you to challenge me to see if I'm telling a story that only a small segment of the American people can hear and listen to and see themselves in, or has moved to amend, figured out a way to start telling a story that cuts across issues, that even cuts across race and gender, that actually starts to find that for 99% of us, we're in the same boat. Right? That's a very powerful thing. And as I tell this story, I want to be honest. I'm going to cover 4 topics together. The first topic gets tossed around a lot in this country. It's the word democracy. To make sure we've got some common ground here, may I ask, somebody tell me, from what language does the word democracy derive? Greek. Greek, very good. Let's break it down. Demos means the people. Kratia means rule. Very good. So literally, the word democracy broken down from the Attic Greek means the people rule. Pop quiz. How many of you know we the people are ruling in the United States? Don't be shy. Look around. I'm not joking. Look around. I do this presentation all across the country. Last year I did it 150 times. By the end of 2014, by the end of 2013, this year, I'll have done it 175 times. I ask that question everywhere I go. Almost nobody raises their hands. Friends, that is a problem. But saying it another way, I think it's a good thing. What? Oh, no, no. It's not a good thing that we the people don't rule. It's a good thing that people aren't raising their hands to that question anymore. See, I submit it's a good thing that we're being politically courageous enough and frankly politically mature enough to acknowledge a reality. We the people are not ruling in the United States, notwithstanding the creation myth that we were taught as children in public schools in this country. We the people don't rule. There is, in fact, not a democracy, but according to the Greek language, we would call it a plutocracy. The rule by a small, wealthy elite. And honestly, I feel like maybe we ought to make up another word. Let's just call it the kleptocracy. The rule of a thieving wealthy elite, because what they're stealing is our labor. They are stealing our collected, created wealth. And what really makes me upset, they're stealing our future and our children's future. That's what's happening. And I can't help but to see the spirit fingers and a little appreciation and love from the young sister up front. You feel it, right? Your future is being stolen from you, don't you? It's true. See, this is what telling the truth feels like. It's rather liberating because we're not taught that it's okay to actually tell this truth. That brings me to the next topic, which is sovereignty. Friends, if I just had the word sovereign on the board, who or what would you think of? Quick, the sovereign.
King.
I bet everybody here thought king, right? That's because the word sovereignty means the authority to rule. And 500 years ago, the king was the sovereign. The sovereign was the king. At least in the European tradition, those words were literally synonymous. And where did the king claim his authority to rule?
God.
God. You don't get more legitimate.
But it's my world. It's my home. It's my home. Not always right, but not all wrong. And I love it. So I'm gonna stay. Make it better. Every day. It's my town. It's my home. Not always right. It's my town. It's my home. Not always right. But not all wrong. And I love it. So I'm gonna stay. Make it better. Every day.
You can claim that you can tell people how to live their lives because God himself has told you. That's a very powerful thing. And to illustrate what I mean by that, we're going to engage in a very quick exercise. This exercise is always a lot of fun for me. You'll see. I will invite those willing to do so to indulge me. Close your eyes for a moment and repeat after me. David Cobb is the king.
David Cobb is the king.
I told y'all this was fun for me. Wow, some of you did it. So I'll try another one. Because David is God's representative on earth. Okay, I don't guess you'll like this one, but I'll try it. And therefore, anything David tells me to do, I will obey without question. Okay. Now, normally, folks, is where I would say open your eyes. But to your credit, Grand Rapids, Michigan, nobody's eyes are closed. Good on you. But I will say, y'all did what everybody does. As soon as you realized what I was asking you to repeat, you all laughed at me. Did you notice that? It was kind of this chuckle. Some of you, I got a couple of you did like that. Not going to play along even for a minute, right? But I think that that I want to point out is you all laughed because it's funny. And not funny like, oh, David has just made a very witty and droll comment. It wasn't that sophisticated. A comedian would say, David, that's a cheap laugh. It's called absurd humor. You said something absurd, then made them repeat it, and so it's a setup. Of course to say that I can tell you how to live your life, is it George? George? That I can tell George how to live his life because who my daddy is? Or even better, that I get to tell all of you how to live your lives and how society will be organized because of the divine right of kings, and I'm now going to be the king. Of course you laughed at that because it's absurd. And yet 500 years ago, people just like George and me and you and you and you and everybody in this crowd not only said it, but we believed it. Friends, I want to ask you to take a moment and reflect on how powerful that is. See, the question of sovereignty, not just who has the authority to rule, but what are the protocols for how decisions are made and implemented for a group of people in society and civilization, that might be one of the most important questions that any society answers for itself. Right? And 500 years ago, those questions were being answered by one person, the king. And I can't even get you to say that out loud without you laughing about it. The point I'm making is that profound change happened around this notion of sovereignty only about 500 years ago. And 500 years is the blink of an eye in human history. So when people tell me, oh, you can't amend the Constitution, that's too hard. Oh, we can't actually have a peaceful, just, democratic, ecologically sustainable society. We'll never win that. I think, have you not been paying attention? Throughout all of world history, specifically throughout U.S. history, profound changes have been made, friends. Changes that we usually don't even think about because we're trained not to think about them, right? But if we just stop and reflect for a moment, we'll see profound changes have been made. And I don't just mean one president getting elected over another. I don't just mean one law getting changed or another. I mean changes in how society is organized. I mean changes in the cultural, deep idea of power and who has it, and legitimacy have been changed. And here it comes, my friends. This is important because if enough people think that something is true, if enough people act like it's true, it's true. See, that's how reality operates. We have a collective responsibility going on about the world that we're living in because we're part of it. And so, friends, if it is true that the United States of America is fundamentally racist, sexist, class oppressive, and that is true, and if it is true that these huge transnational corporations are destroying the planet that we depend upon for life itself, and that is true. See, if these things are true and we know that they're true, then we need to start thinking and acting differently than we have been. I think we need to start thinking and acting like we're in a crisis. You know why I think we should start thinking and acting like we're in a crisis? Because we're in a crisis, y'all. Say it out loud. Say it to each other. It's good to verbalize that.
We're in a crisis.
We're in a crisis. Because you see, when you're in an actual crisis, it calls forth for a kind of action that just bad things does not elicit. When things are a little bit bad, you just acclimate to it a little bit more, right? But if it's an actual crisis, it can provoke us into action. And let's be honest, this crisis is an ecological crisis worldwide. The global climate crisis is real and it's hurtling towards us. There's a social justice crisis because, any society like ours that's locking up more of its adult and young people than any other so-called free society is crisis by definition. When there is 25% of the children going to bed hungry or undernourished in the richest country the world has ever seen, that's crisis by definition. When we have created a school-to-prison pipeline where we are actually taking young people, mostly people of color and poor, and literally turning them into commodities that can be profited by being incarcerated, and that's how the system is designed to operate. By definition, that is a crisis. And it's a global ecological crisis, it's a social justice crisis, and it is a democracy crisis. Because we, the people, don't actually control this society. It's time for us to tell that truth. And that brings me to the next topic, which is legal personhood. Friends, please notice that I did not write corporate personhood on the board. I wrote legal personhood because I want us to understand and come to a knowledge of legal personhood means the ability to assert rights under law. Now, the ability to assert rights, saying it that way, this is not just a legal technicality. Can you see, just thinking about it this way, the question of who is a legal person in this society has been a contest from Jump Street. Who gets to be a person and who can assert rights under the legal system? This is not a technicality. This is about the core question of how our society should be organized and how the legal system should be organized. And the last topic on the board is the word corporation. Because I think that that is equally important. I'll ask, from what language does the word corporation derive?
Greek.
It's from Latin. Latin.
Okay.
Corpus means body, and the suffix tion means to have or create. So literally the word corporation means to have or create body. And by body, I mean literally physical body. That's because in law school we are taught, by the way, any lawyers in the crowd besides me that would admit it? I got one over here. It's a friendly crowd. I think we'll be okay, sir. But I will ask you, do you remember in law school being taught what I remember in corporations class, first day, being taught that a corporation is a legal fiction? Right. See, you know what? You see how he said it? Every lawyer, like that's a no-brainer, isn't it? It's Corporation 101, correct? Now watch this. Even if you weren't subjected to the 3-year experience known as law school, if you have heard that phrase, even if you couldn't precisely define it the way my brother at the bar and I might do, but if you've just heard the phrase that a corporation is a legal fiction, please raise your hand, for real. Look at all those hands go up. So a corporation is legal fiction, corporation is legal fiction, corporation is legal fiction. Folks, if a corporation is a legal fiction, that begs the question. National corporation actually is birthed and comes out of the 14th and 15th century of Europe. You know, the age of discovery. I have to put discovery in those imaginary quotation marks, though, because after all, what did the Europeans discover in the 14th and 15th century? Oh, Africa, Asia, later North and South America. Newsflash, there were people living there. They weren't lost. Nobody got discovered. And so with the same courage and political maturity that we exhibited earlier, I'm challenging us to acknowledge and tell the truth. The 14th and 15th century of Europe wasn't the age of discovery at all. That's a lie that's been taught to us in American history textbooks. What the 14th and 15th century of Europe really represents is the age of rape and pillage and plunder and murder. There's one word that sums that up for me. You see, friends, that's what empire really means. Imperialism is beating people down. It's killing them. It's stealing their resources from them. And get this, follow it because it's important. The modern transnational corporation didn't just accidentally, happenstance, get created during this age of European imperialism. The modern transnational corporation was created as an intentional, deliberate instrument of empire. It was created to facilitate that destruction, that rape, that pillage. Thus, one of the earliest corporations, it still exists today. Many of you have probably heard of it, the East India Company. Ah, yes, the East India Company, literally created in the 1500s to help destroy the entire continent and the subcontinent of India in order to destroy the existing civilization that lived there so that they could more effectively vacuum out the resources of India. And not only that, but to force those people who had been engaged in labor for their own existence and to create that culture, to force them into basically slave labor to assist in the theft of their own resources so that that value, that wealth could be shipped away to the shareholders of the East India Company as profit. It was a business model based on imperialism. Likewise, the Africa Trading Company, created during the same time period. Anybody want to guess what the Africa Trading Company traded? Thank you so much. I heard a couple of different words tossed out there. I'm going to use myself as an example because I don't think that white people talk about race and racism often enough, and it's a hard thing to do, but I'm going to do it as an example to you and encourage you, if you're white also, to think about doing it, and it goes like this. In the 14th and 15th century of Europe, was Africa populated by a bunch of slaves? No. Now, I want to be honest, folks. When the question is asked of me, what did the Africa Trading Company trade? What I'm being honest is, if I don't give it any thought, the word that just pops into my head, slaves. Of course that's the word that pops. It's not because I'm a bad person. See, most of you don't know me. Paul remembers having dinner with me. I had dinner with George. I had dinner with a couple of y'all. Y'all got to know me a little bit, but most of you don't know. But I'm going to just tell you, I'm not a bad person. In fact, I'm a good person. Right? I really am. I'm a good person. So I'm not saying that the fact that the word slaves pops into my head makes me a bad person. It makes me a person educated in this society and part of this culture, because the cultural story that's been told over and over again. See, I was taught how horrible the Africa slave trade was. I was taught that Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth were runaway slaves and that they helped other slaves run away. See, that word has been used for me to think about that all the time. And by the way, I'll never again, except for this topic, ever even use the word runaway slave or even escaped slave, because I think that actually is playing into the wrong way of thinking about it. Instead, I'll suggest to you, and if you should happen to have a history museum that travels around, let's actually call those people self-liberated human beings. You see how that one word change opens up a whole different narrative in our own heads? See, the point is, the word slave does pop into my head because that's the culture I live in. It doesn't make me a bad person, but here's the thing. Africa wasn't populated by slaves, was it? Africa was populated by people. Africa was populated by people. And now I'm going to go one step further and say something that's a little awkward perhaps, but you know what? It's true. So I'm going to say it with trepidation, but with as much courage as I can muster. Africa was populated by people who were basically just like me. Now I say that with some trepidation because I'm not foolish. I see what kind of skin I have. But I say it with conviction because if you ask any scientist, if you ask any biologist, she or he will tell you race does not exist. It is a construct. It is created by society, right? And here's the thing. Just as the corporation is a construct and it was created for a reason, whiteness is a construct and race is a construct created for a reason. And here's the thing. I believe I know why whiteness as a concept. See, but before the United States, mostly it was about place, and there were Scotch and Irish and Germans and Swedes and Italians and like those kinds of descriptors. But whiteness was uniquely created really here, and you know why I think whiteness was created? To bamboozle and confuse people who look like me. To make me say, it goes like this. If you look like me and have my skin color, but you're of the class that's being exploited and oppressed, you know the boss man's boot is on your neck and it's terrible. I hate this system, but at least I'm white. Feel me? Right? I mean, this is the thing. Whiteness is actually created to try to make exploited white people actually feel like they've got more in common with the fellow with the boot on his neck just because the fellow with the boot on his neck happens to have the same pigment that we do. But in point of fact, I actually have much more in common with anybody else who happens to have the boss man's boot on his neck. See, it's really interesting. But here's the thing. We also have to acknowledge that white skin privilege does actually give us some privileges. It's a complex issue. And that's why I'm asking white people have got to get comfortable actually learning the history of whiteness and white supremacy and imperialism and understanding what the great Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. taught us in what is his best speech. His most famous speech is I Have a Dream. And that's a wonderful speech, and I'm glad he made it. But I want to point out something. For my money, his best speech was not delivered in Washington, D.C. His best speech was delivered in Harlem at the Riverside Church, where he described the triple evils of racism, imperialism, materialism. See, apparently it's okay to have a dream, but as soon as you begin to actually make the connections between capitalism, imperialism, and racism, apparently you get shot in this country. So, but here's the thing. I just want to point out that that truth is actually a liberatory experience. Because you know what? Many of you have heard the phrase, the truth will set you free, and I believe that's true. It really is true. But let me tell you this, there should come a warning label with that saying. The truth may set you free, but first it will piss you off. Right? So we need to get comfortable with creating moments for ourselves where we actually confront truth that can actually bring up stuff like this. I want to get back to my story because remember, this is just a story, right? It's just a story to be thinking about these concepts, because the word corporation is important in this story, but now I'm going to make it an American story by asking, how many colonies in the founding of the United States of America?
14.
Come on, y'all, this is a gimme. How many colonies in the founding of the United States? 13. That was the easy one, so here's the follow-up question. Of those 13 colonies, colonialism, imperialism, again, maybe we should revisit this, but of those 13 colonies, how many of them were corporations? Okay, that's supposed to be a trick question, but this is too sophisticated a crowd. The answer, all of them. Because just as it takes the king to have or create body, it took the king to create each one of those colonies. The king created Massachusetts. Now somebody might be saying, that's ridiculous. Massachusetts was already there, but that's why it's a trick question. The land was there. The people who lived on the land, and the deer, and the river, and the forest, physical reality, that was already there. But it took the king to, create it as Massachusetts. And the king created Massachusetts by the use of a very specific legal instrument. Anybody know the name of that legal instrument? Right, it was a joint stock company, or a charter. The charter was used to actually create Massachusetts. Massachusetts began not as the state of Massachusetts, not as the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but instead as the Massachusetts Bay Trading Company. Rhode Island was the Rhode Island and Providence Plantation. Georgia was a penal corporation. Quick pop quiz. Anybody can't tell me what skin color the original, basically enslaved people who were working the Georgia as penal prisoners, what color were they? White. White. See how confusing that can be? The point I'm making, friends, is that these first charters were created by the king, and the king created them by the use of this charter. And now I'm going to show you with a direct quote and an exercise. In this exercise, I'll be the king. Why do y'all think I get to be the king in this exercise? Because I'm telling the story. Wow, see how important stories are? See how important it is that we ask who's telling us these stories? So in this story, though, I'll be the king and I will create Massachusetts. But I'm not going to bother with the day-to-day affairs of Massachusetts. I'm the king. I've got other people to exploit and oppress and so forth. So instead, I'll create something called the royal governor. And as I create this, I'm going to create Massachusetts, and I'll assign a royal governor a new legal topic. And the royal governor has the responsibility, quote, and this is from the direct language of the Massachusetts Bay Trading Company. The royal governor will be responsible to plant, to rule, and to govern this new area on behalf of me, the king, but also to benefit the other shareholders of the joint stock company known as the Massachusetts Bay Trading Company. Massachusetts began on the same business model of empire that the East India Company began. So this notion of America from Jump Street being about searching for religious freedom, that is true enough, but it's a small slice of the truth. All we have to do is take a step back and look at the bigger arc of the fabric, and we say, oh, we've been confused intentionally and deliberately about what it was like when Europeans first came here and why. That's not to take anything away from the Puritans and the Pilgrims, who were a slice of that story, but that's a smaller slice of that story. There's a bigger story about empire and a bigger story about exploitation and oppression being played out. And so, we know that there was a little thing called the American Revolution, right? And the American Revolution, in case you were wondering, I don't want to spoil anything, but happy to say the revolutionaries won. Yay! And by the way, a quick little thing, hard times don't make revolutions. If that were true, there'd be revolutions popping all over the world all the time. You know what makes revolutions? Revolutionaries. So if we would like to see a nonviolent revolution, we got to start thinking and acting like we're revolutionaries too. Nonviolent ones, but I'm going to invite you, if you would be comfortable enough saying, I'm a nonviolent revolutionary, just give it a shot. You don't have to, but if you want to, let's do it now together. I'm a nonviolent revolutionary. How'd that feel? Yeah, right? In fact, she says, you know, look here, can we get a camera back here? What's your name, sister? Jeannie. She was already comfortable, but she kind of leaned back. Is that true? She said, it felt good. I don't want to put you on the spot, sister, but I love that non-verbal
They
feedback.
already know that about
They already knew that about you, so it was very comfortable for her. All I'm getting at is that if we start to say things out loud, it begins to give us permission to start thinking and acting differently, and that's important. So in the American Revolution, the revolutionaries won, so a new charter gets written. This new charter is the supreme law of the land. What's that charter called? What's the supreme law of the land? The U.S. Constitution. How many of you have read that document? Okay, a lot of hands go up. Y'all read my paper. See if I get it right. When you read the Constitution in its entirety, friends, you're going to see two things. The first is the most important, and that is the first three words. We the people. We the people. Those are hallowed words in this country, and they should be. See, we the people come together to create the second actor, which is government itself. Saying it this way, we the people create government. Government is dependent upon us. I like how some of my friends say, government, we the people should never be afraid of the government. Actually, they say government should be afraid of the people. How many of y'all believe the government is afraid of we the people? I do. Thank you for raising your hand, sir. Thank you, Shimako, because this question is what I like to call a slow burn question. Because I'll tell you something, if they weren't afraid of we the people, why is Chelsea Manning about to do 35 years for exposing the truth to the American people? If the government isn't afraid of we the people, why is Edward Snowden being hunted down for exposing the truth to the American people about what's being done to us and allegedly in our names? If the government were not afraid of we the people, why would they have systematically shot down hundreds of Occupy encampments across the country where ordinary Americans were just coming together to have conversation with each other? Here's something, my friends. I think the government and the ruling elite are, in fact, scared of us. And I wish I would have the opportunity to talk one-to-one with a member of the real ruling elite. Not the elected officials, not even the 1%, but the 0.0001%. The super billionaire rich that really run everything. You know what I would like to tell them? Don't be scared. Really, don't be scared. Because I know that right now you're so addicted to that crack pipe of power that you can't see anything other than just the mental illness associated with accumulating ever more power. But you know what, this nonviolent revolution that I'm part of? You may not like it, but your grandchildren are going to be grateful that we did an intervention on your ass. They're going to be grateful that we actually intervened to stop you from raping and pillaging the planet, all to accumulate more zeros on a bank account that doesn't actually mean anything. Friends, these folks, and I mean this with love, they are at best delusional. They're really kind of mentally ill because they're just acquiring more and more stuff, destroying the planet that they and their own children depend upon for life itself. Honestly, if we had a just and compassionate healthcare system, we'd get them help. Yeah. Instead, we put them in charge, and that's our fault. Right? We've got to actually think in a nonviolent revolutionary way about how to get them the help that they so obviously need. I want to get back to this, though, because in the United States Constitution, we the people create government, and we the people are free, and we are sovereign. What does the word sovereign mean again?
King.
The authority to rule. See, the king isn't sovereign anymore. We kicked his butt out. But government isn't sovereign either. Government is subordinate and accountable. Government is subordinate to whom? The people. Government is accountable to whom? The people. That's got a ring to it, doesn't it? I like how this is going. Let's continue. We the people are free and sovereign because we the people have rights. Government does not have rights. Government only has duties. And as a lawyer, I want to stop for a moment and point out the difference between rights and duties is profound. Right, brother? If I have the right to do something, it means I can do it. And I don't need your permission. I don't need the City Council of Grand Rapids' permission. I don't need the state legislature of Michigan's permission. Thank goodness with your crazy legislature these days. But the point is, I don't need anybody's permission, not individually or the government permission. If I have the right to do something, it means I can do it. And it doesn't matter whether it's popular or not. It doesn't matter whether it's politically acceptable or not. Having a right is profound. And government never has rights over the people. Government only has duties to the people. And where do those duties come from? Well, remember, all power resides with the people. See, power to the people was not just a Black Panther Party chant. The concept of power to the people is something that every revolutionary
But it's my world. It's my home. Not always right. But not all wrong. And I love it. So I'm gonna stay. Make it better. Every day.